So week two, yeah, hope week one went well for everybody. Week two is gonna kind of just be another step. So week one is kind of all about getting set up, and then week two we're gonna kind of start to kind of understand, I guess, how databases are kind of designed and structured, and the implications of all that. And week two is kind of a fun one because we're gonna spend some time kind of unpacking, reverse engineering someone else's website or whatever it is you want to do. Doesn't have to be a website. It can really be whatever it is that you want to do. But yeah, we're gonna kind of just really think through how how a website's or how a database is designed, and then yeah, we're gonna kind of go through how they do that. So we're gonna do one of those here in just a second. Kind of one of our own design, so to speak. I'll kind of run through a quick example. A couple different ways you can do it. You can do it with MySQL Workbench. There's a kind of a plethora of online tools that you can use. For those of you on a Mac, I'm still trying to find some sort of way through this. Haven't quite got there yet. That's why I'm on Linux right now. But Workbench sometimes crashes. For me, it seems to happen all the time whenever I open the ERD editor. So anyway, still working on a workaround for that, but we're gonna explore for this assignment some other options if you're stuck in that boat. So yeah, let's get to that point and then we'll see where we have time left wise. But real quick, kind of just want to go over this prep and reading, kind of walk through that just a little bit. So this week on the preparation and reading, and also if you didn't see it in the announcements, I also posted a couple of what I call quick bite videos. They're just some quick videos I kind of put together to walk through some basics of the select statement and some other things. So I hope those are helpful. In the past, they've been well received. So I'm hoping that they're also helpful for you in just kind of like a quick, like, hey, cut all the fluff, just get right to it kind of a thing. So I would highly recommend checking those out. And then down here, we're going to talk a little bit about these things as well. So you can kind of see, like we talked about, there's a couple different things. I would definitely check out these PowerPoint slides, like we talked about last week, and then kind of use the rest as kind of check out the PowerPoint slides, read the chapter, and then kind of check out the rest. Now, in lieu of I'm kind of just gonna go through. And there's two chapters this week. Sorry, I bouncing back and forth. But what we're gonna do this week is instead of a paper, we're actually going to kind of do this little project. And instead of jumping into the course material through the PowerPoint and thus that this week, we're going to jump straight into actually that deliverable. And we're going to talk about how we put it together, show you how Workbench works. And from there, we will hopefully get most of the content that way. It should be a little bit more useful. So anyways, this week, instead of a paper, we have the reverse engineering website project. So basically what we're going to do is we're going to pick a website. It says a website. It can really be anything, any application, so on and so forth. And what we're going to do is we're going to create an ERD, or an entity relationship diagram. Basically all it is it's we can design on how these tables connect to each other. So we're going to put that together. I'll kind of show you how to do that. And the deliverable is actually a video of you talking through that. It doesn't have to be super formal. It can be really quick and easy. We'll get to that point and then we'll talk about it. As far as recording, I don't care if you show your camera. You can just do a screen share just like I'm doing now, talk through your design. And and when you talk through it, we're only in week 2, so I don't expect it to be 100% accurate or anything like that. Really what I'd like when you talk through it, talk about why you chose to do things, and if you chose to do something and realize like, oh, that's not going to work, talk us through that. Kind of just like really explain like why you did what you did, the experience, so on and so forth. Okay, so let's talk a little bit about this project, and we're gonna do one together. So, um, anyways, I really like snowmobiles, and my snowmobile flavor of choice is Ski-Doo. So I'm gonna pick on like some Ski-Doo snowmobile website, and this can be, you can pick anything. You can pick, in the past I've had people do all sorts of things. Like another example is I've really gotten into Disney Lorcana. Don't know if any of you guys have heard of that. It's a trading card game. Disney just came out with it. So like I've had people in the past do like Pokemon cards, Magic cards, video game stuff, those kinds of things. So you can do a lot of different things. You can kind of pick one and go with it. But what I would do is you want to pick something that's very data driven. I've had people also do in the past, like just like a random website, like this. Like really, what I was looking for is like a catalog of the cards. I'm not seeing it here though. Um, but anyways, you want to pick something that's very data rich, data driven, because you don't want to just like have tabs be your table, because it doesn't really necessarily work that way, which you'll come to find out. Like I said, it doesn't have to be perfect, but what I would say, the more data driven it is, the easier it's going to be. Think like a database, right? Like we're storing a bunch of data. So hopefully this example helps. So anyways, I'm going to pick this Skidoo snowmobile lineup here. And you can see there's a bunch of different items on here. So like when I'm looking at this, you can see like, there's different items, and you can see there's these different categorizations for them, like deep snow, trail, crossover, utility, mid-sized, youth, like, so there's different categories. So we can already kind of see this like hierarchy here, and some, kind of distinct things. So this is where we're going to kind of start like thinking a little bit like, oh, like, yeah, like we can start to kind of picture how this is going to come together. So like, we're going to obviously need like something to hold our actual snowmobiles, but then we're also going to need to hold like these categories. And then on top of that, you'll notice that like each snowmobile has a bunch of different kind of price points and different stats, which we'll get into a little bit more here. But each one of those things, are common amongst the snowmobile and the different snowmobiles. And when we're designing a database, the whole idea is we want to remove duplication, remove redundancy. We want to keep everything very logically isolated and organized, but also in a super efficient way, so that we can always get what we need without, typing up too much. So anyways, I'm going to show you the simple way first, and then I'll show you the technical way. So, and by what I mean by the simple way is, like I said, this doesn't have to be very complicated. We can just use something like a spreadsheet. So I'm going to be here in Google Sheets, and I'm going to be kind of building kind of quote an ERD in here, and then I'll show you like the official way in Workbench. Because sometimes, honestly, I even just draw pictures. Like I'll just draw bubbles, like a lot of times when I'm just thinking through things. But anyways, we'll go this way. So anyways, I have my my spreadsheet here, and like I said, we kind of see that there's snowmobiles here, and then there's these different categories. And I always like to kind of start with like the base thing I'm looking at. So for example, if it's snowmobiles, I'm going to start with the actual, like, hey, the models of these snowmobiles. And then if I was doing something like a trading card game like Magic the Gathering or Lorcana, I would start with like, hey, what is a card, right? Like whatever, like the bulk, the premise of our data, that's where I like to start. Mentally, it just makes sense for me there. And then I kind of work around it, so to speak. So in this case, I'm going to build a model table, right? And inside my model table, now this is where a lot of people tend to really kind of, they can veer off in like a crazy direction. So this is where you want to really think about what we're doing here. So I'm going to put this into like a vertical form, and then I'll kind of show you like basically how this would work. with a bunch of different tabs. So I'm actually going to rename this tab. We're going to call this ERD, and we'll come back to some of these other things. So then now I think, well, okay, well, what does a snowmobile, what does a model have? What does each model have? And I can look at this and I can say, well, first, what we need is a primary key, right? So I'm going to call this a model ID. And, we could put data types out here off to the side. So I'm going to say an int and primary key, just so we know. And then as I'm looking through this, what else do they have? Well, they have a name, right? Models have names. We can see like the free ride, the summit, all that kind of stuff. And this is what we call varchar, and we can give it a length. So I'm going to say, it can be upwards of 60 characters. And some other things. You can see that there's a year here, right? To 2024. Now this is where we start to have some choices. So what I'm going to do is instead of just putting year here, what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to build a year table. And I'm going to call this a model year. And sorry, I'm going to put all this in not caps here. Model year. And yeah, and this is where you can kind of decide like, oh, we can have like a model year. If we're going to reuse year, we could just leave it called year. So anyways, what I'm going to do is I'm just going to call this a year. It's int and primary key. In this case, this table is going to be really easy, really simple. I am going to add some fluff to it though, because we're going to kind of get smart about it just a little bit. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to say, oh, it has a start date, which should then be a date, and an end date, right? And let's say we also have the model year, we say when it was announced, and when it was released. So we kind of have like some dates around that, right? Like, so for example, like when did we announce the new models? When did we release them to actually be purchased? Those kinds of things. Basically, the model year is going to be this container for all things, all the models within that given year, right? So now back on our model, we have our model ID, we have a name. We're going to have a year ID now, and this is an int, and it's a foreign key, and it's going to reference this. So I'm going to put foreign key references model year, for example. Basically that's how we connect it. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to pause right here for a second, and we're going to actually build this out in kind of like spreadsheet form. Real quick, for those of you here, how many of you have ever done in Excel like a VLOOKUP type thing? Has anyone done a VLOOKUP?
Yeah, I already have done it.
Okay. So yeah, so this is going to be very similar to VLOOKUP, the way that these databases work. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to put my model year here. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to take this ERD and I'm essentially going to flatten it. Because like when we look at this in a schema form, we look at it kind of in a vertical sense, but really the way the data would look here is we would have a year, a start date, an end date. It's a table. That's essentially what we're making, is we're making a table, and it goes like this. So these are our different columns, and we know the data types for each of these. So now we could kind of start plugging in some numbers. So I'm going to bold these. So like, let's just build one sample year, right? The year 2024. Now, what's interesting about snowmobiles is that they, just like cars, they seem to always kind of like run like half a year early. Um, and so anyways, like, let's just pretend that this really actually kind of started in August 1st of 2023, right? And it's going to end September 30th of 2024. It was announced on March 15th, 2023, and it was released for whatever, let's call it June 10th, 2023. I'm just purely making up numbers. There we go. So that's kind of what we're looking for there. I'm going to delete this. And you guys don't need to do this step. I'm kind of purely just doing this just so you can kind of see how this works, because we're not defining the options within these. We're not saying what data is going to fill these tables. We're talking about the structure. And that's kind of how I like to separate in my mind is we're building a house, but we're not putting the furniture inside, right? Like to me, the rows are the furniture, the belongings, and everything that goes inside the structure. We're just defining the structures. We're saying how many rooms you can have and what size these are and everything, but we're not telling you what you put in. We're defining what you can put in it, but we're not saying what is actually going inside there. We're just kind of building the rules around it. So let's build another sheet here. We're going to call this model. Let's make sure we got done here. So we got a year ID. Oh, and then our last table, we were going to have a category. Capitalization here. So category. I'm going to call this a model category. We'll call it category. Sorry. We're going to come back to why I'm changing my mind here, because these are actually significant. So let's have a category ID. It's going to be an int primary key. We're going to have a name, varchar 60. And then, because like we're always displaying this stuff on the website, what I'm going to have is I'm going to call display sequence, right? And it's just going to be an int, and it can just count up, because maybe we want to, typically what they do is they display the deep snow first. So I'm going to put an integer there for the display. Okay, so there's our category. And so now we need a category ID over here. Category ID. Again, that's going to be an int foreign key. All right. And then I'm going to build this. We have a model year. Let's build out our model. So we have model ID name, year, category, model ID name, year ID, category ID. I'm missing something. Nope. And then, but one thing we're going to add is a price. So let's add a price here, because obviously we need a price for each model. We're going to call this MSRP, because obviously there's a ton of customers. We're going to call it starting underscore price. We'll call it starting MSRP. And this is where we go decimal 15.2, meaning it can be 15 long with 2 in the decimal point. So that's my go-to money data type, essentially. So we're going to do this starting MSRP. All right, now I'm going to give us a random model name here. So 2564. The name is a summit. The year ID is, well, in this case, it would be 2024. We made that kind of convenient because the number is our year. Category ID. Well, we don't have a category ID, so let's go ahead and add one. Category. And we have ID, name, and display sequence. Name and display sequence. All right. Nice and simple. And in this case, we're going to have, and I'm putting some numbers here because just to kind of showcase that it doesn't matter really what goes here, but typically you'll see them kind of increment in some way, shape, or form, but not necessarily either. It could be that they deleted a couple of categories at one point. So that's what I'm going to show there, just to show that the numbers really don't matter to us. The primary keys usually don't matter to us. And then let's do one more. Utility. All right, so now we have those. So let's put model over here. And our model, in this case, the summit, we want it to go into the deep snow category. So we're going to give it 1001. starting MSRP is a whopping $13,099. And there we go. So that is one model. Now we're going to do one more model, 20565. We're going to do the free ride 2024. It's a deep snow again. It's even more. Let's pick one from one more category. So let's do backcountry 256,568. We'll skip one. Backcountry 2024. This one is crossover. So 1005. Starting at SRP is a lot more easy to stomach at 10 grand. All right, so there's kind of like a couple of examples. Now, this is where we have to kind of, does this make sense to everybody, like the primary key? So for those of you who have done a VLOOKUP, basically what we can do is we can have it like search for something. So for example, I want this category ID, and I'm going to look up inside category from this range, and then I'm going to return the name of the category. This is essentially what we're doing. We're just looking up the value, just like we would do, you know, if we wanted to kind of do this ourselves. Oh, what's the category ID? 1001. Come here, 1001. Okay, what's the name of it? Deep snow. That's essentially like what we're doing here. And that's essentially what our database is going to do, but it keeps them all isolated in their own tables. And we're going to kind of talk about why now. So what happens if we want to allow, because this is probably going to come up inside of one of you guys's databases that you're going to reverse engineer. What happens if we want to allow snowmobiles to be in more than one category? So like right now, we only have one category per model. And so what we're saying based on our current design is that a model can only be in one category. It's kind of like a firm, hard, fast rule. And we dictate, by our data model will dictate the business logic behind the scenes. So what this means is if your boss said, hey, like, you know, I want to be able to list the backcountry in deep snow as well because it can perform in both, right? You'd be like, well, we're in trouble then because it doesn't work that way, right? Like it just wouldn't work. So what we can do is we can kind of adjust our model to compensate, because right now we have a category and we have a model, but what happens if we want to put more than one model to one category? So what we can do is we can say a model category, and this is again why I said I was going to change the name of that table. And this is where we have a model category ID. And I just want you to see like what happens when we make this little, we add one table to kind of be this intermediary, and it makes a huge difference to the whole model. So all this is going to be is it's going to have its own primary key. It's going to have a model ID, and it's going to have a category ID. All these are ints. This is a foreign key, references model, and then foreign key references. Oops. Category. All right, so now we have our one more table. So now what we're going to do is come over here, rename, and we're going to say model category. And it's going to be a model category ID, model ID, category ID. Sorry, I don't know the keyboard shortcuts for Sheets, so I'm a little slow. But if we go back into our ERD, what we need to do now is we're actually going to take out this. We're going to move this up. So I'm just going to go like this. So now model is no longer directly tied to category, but what we have is this, what I like to call like this intermediary table, or a many-to-many table. and it's going to kind of be the middleman between these two. So now what we have is we can pick, again, some random number, 2056. We're going to go look at our model. So let's, the backcountry, right? That was kind of like our example. I'm going to grab its model ID and plug it in here. So 20, and sorry, that is, I'm going to pick a different number because that's going to get confusing real fast. So model category ID 1001. Here's our model ID, and then we pick a category. So we want this to be in crossover. And then we want it another one. So this one's going to be 1002, same model ID, but we want this to also be in deep snow, which is 1001. And so now we have a way to put one model into multiple categories. Now, the way we get that data now becomes a little different, because now if we just, instead of seeing one model each time, we're going to see two models, right? Like, so if we were displaying this website, we would see the snowmobile listed here and here, right? Which it doesn't, which is why we're doing the reverse engineering. But I wanted to highlight those scenarios, because if I did see that snowmobile twice, I would know, oh, you're building this intermediary table that will let you kind of store two different options. So anyways, real quick, before I switch over to Workbench, any questions just overall about the kind of what we just talked about? And then we're going to switch over to Workbench, and hopefully if there's anything still shaky, it clears up. But any questions I can answer right now? Okay, I'm going to take silence as a no. Great. So we're going to now take what we just did, and we're going to do an ERD here in Workbench. So what we're going to do is, if you come up here to go File, and we're going to say New Model, it's going to open up this whole thing. And from here, I'm just going to say Add Diagram, double click on this, and it should pop up a window just like this. And we're going to do the same thing we just did, but we're going to use Workbench and let it kind of do some of this work for us. So anyways, there's a little table button over here. It says place new table. So you click that, just click anywhere over here, and it'll kind of put this empty table here for you. And from here, we can build this out the same way we just did. So I'm going to do the same thing, model. We're going to give it some names, model ID. It's an int. There's these little check boxes. So PK stands for primary key. NN stands for not null, which is what we're going to leave. It'll automatically check once you hit primary key. And then there's this little AI over here that stands for auto increment. So if it's your primary key, I always do this: PK, NN, AI. Primary key, it can't be empty, not null, and it's going to count for us, auto increment. So we're going to do that. And I'm actually going to pull up my ERD here over on the side so I remember what we did. So then I'm going to have my name. This is the model name. We're going to do a varchar 60, just like we put in our model there. I'm going to do year ID, which in this case is going to be integer. And then I'm also going to do a category ID. Now, we have these here, but they're not actually connected to anything yet. So we're going to have to build those first, so then we can connect them. So we're going to come back to this table and connect it. But like I said, I like to kind of just get started. So I can it just helps me visualize. All right, so now we're going to double click on this one again, do a different one. So we're going to call this one, let's start with model year. Let's go into columns here, model year ID, and you can do a bunch of different things. So I'm going to do year ID, and I'm actually going to change my model just a little bit. I'm going to make this just a primary key, and then I'm going to say, display year. I'm going to call it display year, and this is going to be an int. So basically it's going to be 2004. So that way it's separate from this in case we delete one. Probably the wiser choice. So I'm going to do that. That way, if we want to, we can have duplicates, all sorts of stuff like that. And it's just good design. So we're going to have a display year, which is an integer. That's like our 2002, 2003, 2004, etc. And then we're going to have I'm just going to put an announce date for the sake of time. and the release date. So we have a date and release date. There we go. So there's our model year. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to go back to this table. And if I double click on it, get into the table, you'll notice there's a little tab down here that says foreign keys. So I always like to do this. I just let it self-name, but my typical naming structure, FK underscore the table name underscore, and then just an incremented number, 1, 2, 3, 4, depending on how many you have. And then in this case, we say what we want it to connect to. So model year, you'll notice it builds the line. And then over here, I say which columns. So in this case, year ID, and it should automatically, if it detects that there's the same name, it'll do it. So year ID connects to year ID. And just like that, I'm going to do that. And you'll notice if I hover over this now, you'll see that it connects year ID to year ID between the two tables. So that means we're connected. You'll also notice that it has this little crow's foot. You'll learn about this in the reading. So this little thing we call the crow's foot. That means it's a one-to-many relationship, meaning that one model year, 2024, can have multiple models. So that's what that little diagram means. So anyways, that's why we kind of do these. So let's continue. And sorry, I'm going to hurry just a little bit because I know we're running short on time here. So now we're going to do category. Category ID. Data type is an integer. Primary key, auto null, not null, auto increment. We're going to have category ID, name, and display sequence. So an integer. Here we go. And again, I'm going to go into model and I'm going to go into foreign keys. And we're going to just double click, add a new row. This time this connects to category, and category ID equals category ID. Oh, but you'll notice that we get an error. It says, hey, this column has a varchar and this one's an int, so that's not going to work. So what we need to do is we need to go into these tables. All your foreign keys should be integers. Technically it doesn't have to be, but for the sake of being wise, I would recommend it, and it makes things a lot easier. So again, we can check this, hover over it, category ID goes to category ID. All right, so there we go, we're connected. Yeah, so this is, it's super simple, but this is one ERD. So we can, we could leave it just like this. And what I would say is it doesn't have to be very complicated. I would say, leave it in whatever it needs to get done, right? So like in my case, like I just want to show these snowmobiles, the categories they're in, and that sort of thing. So just leave it to whatever you're going to do. Obviously, you need more than one table. So I would just say we know like when we're just completely like skimping out, but in this case, for this project, I'm definitely more interested in making sure we understand design implications, and kind of how we go about planning an ERD, because like really this is where most people start when they're designing a platform, a database, an app. The data model is where we always start. And so, this is kind of how we go about showcasing this. And then from here, there's actually a way you can have it build this for you. And we'll get there next week. But yeah, anyways, that's kind of the assignment. So I'm going to pause there. Any questions on this that we just did in Workbench and or the assignment in a whole?
I have a question.
Yep.
Does the video have to be 5 minutes, or can it be less than 5 minutes?
It can be less than 5 minutes. I'll be honest, I'm not really picky. So,
If it's like 2 minutes or like a minute and a half.
Yeah, I would say, for me, like I would Like, so for example, like if I was doing it for this one, I would show the website. Um, I would show the website that I did it on, which is right here. Sorry, I have Windows open. I would show it and kind of talk through just like I did, right? Like I would say, I noticed that, these are the main objects, the models are the main objects, and that they're organized by category, and that we also would want to be able to handle multiple years. So I would kind of start there, and then I would kind of like transition into, and here's how I modeled this out, and just like I did, if people, I would mention, hey, if people wanted it to be in multiple categories, I would have to add on their table, um, and just talk through like why you did what you did. Like for every kind of connection, I would kind of talk through it, talk through each one of your tables and how they're connected.
Okay.
But yeah, wherever that lands, like I said, we all kind of know like when it's just like, wow, there's nothing here.
Yeah.
But so I don't get too worked up over like, oh, it's under 5 minutes. For me, it's more qualitative, not quantitative.
Okay.
Well, I get a question, but it is just a curiosity question.
Yeah.
Well, the experience I have with databases are with Laravel. Like, I have this framework that I create some script files, and those script files, they create the databases for me. So what I noticed in this migrations that I create is that the column IDs most of the time they use like big integers instead of integers for column item for ID column data types. So is there any problem to use big integers instead of integers for column IDs?
No, and I would say the big integers are probably the safe bet. Um, typically, big integers are used because like they can handle more data, right? So like with the data types, an integer can only store up to so many characters, but a big integer can store a lot more. So they're likely using big integer because they plan on having a lot of data, right? So typically in most of like my little kind of project databases and like these examples, um, I only use integers, and that's purely because like even if I was Skidoo, this is where we get more into like database tuning a little bit, but a little bit so it's applicable. Great question. Is as we think through like when we're assigning data types and links to all these different tables, the important thing to remember is like, what am I ever going to reach the max here? Because every time we partition these column links, we kind of set aside that much data, whether or not it uses it. So for like, if I say like, oh, this name can be 60 characters long, even if I only have 2 characters there on disk, on the server disk, like where my database is stored, it's going to allocate 60 character slots for that record. And so and so like when we're designing these databases, a lot of it's about kind of balancing how much storage do I want on disk versus future proof, right? And so like in this case, like if I'm just gonna kind of handle these snowmobiles, the odds of me ever hitting the max limit on the integer data type is none. Hopefully we're in flying cars by then, we're not ever gonna worry about it. But like if you're Facebook or Google and you're handling these massive amounts of data, even a big int won't solve your needs, and they actually use like hexadecimal type data types, where they actually store it in like GUIDs and varchar type data types. But again, those take up a massive amount of actual physical data storage on the computer. So that's kind of like where you find that balance. But to answer your question, ultimately it only matters if you plan on outdoing your integer. And a lot of people by default use big int because they just want to be future proof.
Oh, right. Thank you. So it's only about like amount of data in the tables, so it doesn't matter. Okay. Yeah, thank you. It was a very good explanation. Sorry, it was just curiosity. Sorry for
No, yeah, no,
yeah.
absolutely. And
All
just
right,
so you
thank you.
know, little teaser for next week, and I'll hurry through this. But basically, once we get to this point, just like you said, like you kind of generate scripts. We're going to do the same thing. So, like right now we're kind of designing this, but we're actually going to turn not with these projects entirely before anyone gets nervous. But if you do the final project for this course, which there's a choice, you can either do an exam or you can do a final project. If you do the final project, we're going to talk through how we can actually script the whole creation and population of a database. So that way you can just run it and scripts really easy. So you don't have to kind of go through this process every time. But yeah, no, great question. Any others?
I have questions about like kind of the other assignments that are on the that are due for this week.
Okay, yeah, let's hear them.
So it says in the exercises that we're to meet as a group. Is that still just going to be like individual? Because I know it says that we still have to submit it individually, even if we do work as a group to complete the exercise. Are we not worrying about groups this week for the exercise, or do we
Great
need to, like,
question. So my approach to groups, and you'll see it kind of throughout here. To me, like the online portion of taking an online class is because like a lot of times like we're all in crazy schedules. If we didn't
Yeah.
have crazy schedules, the online probably wouldn't be the best choice.
Yeah.
But so my approach to the group work is if you want a group, I am happy to facilitate helping find one. You're welcome to reach out to people on teams and forums, groups as you will, but I also do not expect it in any way, shape, or form. So if you want to just kind of work solo, you're welcome to do that as well. But overall, the class, everything's submitted individually. Like it's never like, oh, we did this collectively. One person submits. Everyone has to submit. But feel free. Like I get a mix every term. Like there's always someone who wants groups, and so they kind of start clanning together to like work through things. But by no means is it required. You can do everything in this class without them.
Okay, cool. And then the other question that I had was, you mentioned something about like a devotional and like us volunteering for a devotional. Is that something that we need to start volunteering ourselves?
Yeah, I've always kind of left it ad hoc because I know you like, especially the online students, you get this in every course. So yeah, so the help one another is just kind of there if you feel so inspired. Help each other, and devotional is there if you feel inspired. Obviously, people see it. Most of the time, that kind of ends up happening over Teams. Like every couple weeks, I usually my language is music, and so every once in a while you'll see me post on Teams just like a YouTube link or something to some nice uplifting, church music. But yeah, not required at all as well. Purely voluntary.
Okay. I have figured that that's how it was with the exercises and the devotional thing, but I wasn't positive.
Yeah.
That was it for me.
All right. Perfect. Anything else? All right. Well, hey, look, appreciate you guys being here. Again, apologies for the tardiness here, getting late start on a meeting, but appreciate you guys being here. And yeah, if there's anything I can do for you throughout the week, feel free to ping me on Teams. Otherwise, I hope you guys have a great week, and yeah, good luck this week in all your classes and on this one as well.
Thank you. Have a good week too, Brother Cook, and stay warm.
Yeah, thank you. Appreciate it.
Bye.